The clerk slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. 2 pens, 2 signature lines. Outside the window, Millhaven, Montana sat gray and still under an October sky that could not decide whether to rain. Sloane Whitfield picked up her pen. Without hesitation, she had signed hundreds of contracts, and this one was no different. That was what she told herself. Across the table, Carter Briggs reached for the second pen. He wore a flannel shirt washed too many times, and his hands were the hands of a man who worked with them calloused, certain. He looked at her once before he signed. Not at the paper. At her. His eyes were steady and gave away nothing. The signature he left was short and clean, pressed with the precision of someone who had spent years filling out orders under pressure. Sloane looked at it half a second longer than necessary. She did not know why. 3 weeks earlier, Sloane had been on County Road 12 when her rental car's left rear tire gave out on a stretch of road with no name and no cell signal and nothing in either direction but lodgepole pine and the smell of coming rain. She had driven up from Missoula that morning to inspect a parcel of land agricultural conversion property, 214 acres, the kind of acquisition that looks different in person than on a spreadsheet. She had seen it. She had made her notes. She was heading back when the tire went. She stood beside the car in a coat that cost more than most people's monthly rent and looked at the flat tire the way she looked at most problems, as something to be solved immediately, by someone else, with a phone call. The phone call was not possible. The sky that had been overcast all morning was beginning to do something more committed. She stood in the gravel for approximately 90 seconds before she accepted she was going to be there a while. A white pickup truck slowed on the opposite shoulder. The man who got out did not ask if she needed help. He walked to the back of her car, crouched down, and looked at the tire. Then, he went back to his truck for a jack and a spare. He worked without talking much, and when he did speak it was to tell her to stay on the gravel, away from the road's edge. No wasted motion, no pause to reassess. The whole thing took 11 minutes. His name was Carter Briggs. She found that out when she offered him money, and he shook his head and said his name like that was the only transaction he needed, an introduction, not a payment. She watched him load the flat into her trunk and thought, "This man has no idea who I am." It was not a complaint. It was closer to relief. She had not felt invisible in years. Everyone in her world knew exactly what she was worth and what she controlled. Carter Briggs looked at her the way he would have looked at anyone stranded on that road, as a person who needed a tire changed. Nothing more. She drove the rest of the way to Missoula thinking about something she could not name. She did not think about Carter Briggs again until 4 days later, when she sat in her father's estate attorney's office in Chicago and heard a sentence that rearranged every plan she had made for the next decade. Randall Whitfield had built Whitfield Capital across 31 years and 2 market crashes. He had done it by being smarter than the people around him and more patient than the market itself, and he had died 14 months ago. In the same measured way, he had done everything with paperwork in order and intentions spelled out to the letter. One of those intentions was the clause his attorney now read aloud for the second time, because Sloane had asked him to read it again, slowly, in case she had missed something. She had not missed anything. The clause was clear. Sloane Whitfield would retain full executive control of Whitfield Capital, including her 51% voting majority, only if she was legally married before her 35th birthday. That birthday was 6 weeks away. If the condition was not met, controlling interest passed to the board, a board Douglas Crane had spent 2 years quietly reshaping in his own favor. Douglas had been her father's business partner for 11 years and Sloane's adversary for most of them. He was the kind of man who smiled during negotiations and meant it, because he enjoyed the fight more than the outcome. Sloane sat with the information for 48 hours. Then she drove back to Millhaven. She found Carter through the county business registry, Briggs Electrical, sole proprietor, established 4 years prior. She sat across from him in the diner on Main Street and laid out the arrangement with the same directness she brought to every boardroom. A legal marriage. 12 months. Full discretion. At the end of it, a quiet dissolution, No claims from either party. She would compensate him for his time. Carter listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said he did not want the money. Sloane blinked. "Then what do you want?" "My daughter's routine stays the same," he said. "School, dinner, bedtime. Whatever arrangement we make, it doesn't touch that." Sloane had not known about the daughter. She had researched Carter Briggs, the electrician, and found no debt, no record, no public profile, no complications. The daughter was a complication, but Carter said it without apology or negotiation, the way a person states a fact about the weather, and Sloane found she could not argue with it. She said yes. The morning Sloane moved into the house on Birchwood Lane, she carried one suitcase and a laptop bag and stood in the doorway for a moment before stepping inside. The house was small by any standard she had used for 15 years. It sat on a half-acre lot at the edge of town, with a covered porch and a wood-burning stove and windows that let in the flat northern light without apology. What stopped her was not the size, it was how clean it was. Not cleaned for company, clean the way a place gets when someone has lived alone in it long enough to develop a system, and the system has become habit, and the habit has become character. No television in the main room, no liquor on the counter, no clutter anywhere. Along the far wall, a low bookshelf held 2 rows of books, military history, organized by era. She ran a finger along the spines without thinking. Thermopylae, Gettysburg, Stalingrad, Fallujah. On the shelf above the fireplace, one framed photograph stood with its face turned toward the wall. Carter showed her to the guest room without ceremony. He had cleared the dresser for her things and hung a spare towel on the hook behind the door. He had done the small preparatory things people do when expecting a guest, and none of the larger theatrical things people do when trying to make an impression. Sloane laid out her terms at the kitchen table that evening. Professional demeanor in public. No information shared with mutual acquaintances. The arrangement to remain private. No displays of affection beyond what necessary appearances required. Carter nodded at each one without writing anything down, without asking her to repeat herself, listening with the focused, almost impersonal attention of someone very good at receiving information and holding it. When she finished, he said, "That works." Then he poured her a cup of coffee without asking if she wanted one, set it in front of her, and sat back down like the conversation was still ongoing. It was such a small thing. She did not know why she noticed it. Mia Briggs appeared in the hallway while Sloane was still at the table. She was 7 years old and small for her age, with dark blonde hair that needed a trim and her father's level. Watchful eyes. She looked at Sloane the way children look at things they are trying to categorize, not with fear or excitement, but with serious, unhurried assessment. She wore pajamas with a pattern of small yellow stars and carried a stuffed bear by one ear with the carelessness of a child who loves a thing so much she does not need to treat it carefully. "Are you the lady who's going to live here?" Mia asked. "For a little while," Sloane said. Mia thought about this. "Are you going to stay?" Sloane opened her mouth and found she did not have an answer that was both honest and kind. Carter stepped in from the kitchen doorway, looked at his daughter, and said steadily, "Just for 1 year, Mia." It was the right answer. It was the only answer. But something in the way he said it landed a fraction of a second late, as if the words had been retrieved from a place where they did not entirely fit anymore. Sloane noticed. She did not say so. 11 days into the arrangement, she woke at a few minutes past 3 in the morning for no reason she could name. The house was dark and quiet, but a thin line of light showed under the kitchen door. She stood in the hallway for a moment, then pushed it open. Carter was sitting at the kitchen table, back straight, hands resting flat on the wood surface, eyes open and completely alert. There was nothing in front of him except a glass of water. No book, no phone, no indication he had been doing anything except sitting in the quiet, dark, awake, at 3 in the morning, for what might have been a long time. He did not startle when she came in. He looked at her once, acknowledged her with the faintest inclination of his head, and looked back at the middle distance. He did not explain himself. She did not ask. She poured a glass of water and stood at the counter for a minute, watching him without letting herself watch him, and then she went back to bed. She lay in the dark, thinking about the quality of stillness she had seen in him. It was not the stillness of a man at peace. It was the stillness of a man who had learned to be still the way other people learn a second language out of necessity, with great effort, until it became something close to fluency. There is a difference between a person who is calm and a person who has decided to be, and she had spent enough time in rooms full of powerful people to know which one she was looking at. She did not sleep again for a long time. The next morning, she saw the scar. Carter was in the kitchen in a t-shirt, back partly turned, reaching for something on the upper shelf. A scar ran from his left shoulder down past the collar of the shirt and out of sight, long, pale, and straight, though she knew from its uneven edges it had not been made by a surgeon's hand. The kind of scar that is made quickly, in a place without proper equipment, by someone doing the best they can under conditions where the best is barely enough. He pulled down what he wanted, turned around, registered her expression with his usual steadiness, and said nothing. He put on his work jacket and left for the day. Sloane sat with her coffee and typed his name into a search engine. Carter Briggs, Millhaven, Montana. Carter Briggs, electrician. She tried combinations and variations for 20 minutes. She found the business registry listing. She found nothing else. No social media, no news mentions, no public records beyond the most basic. It was not the digital footprint of a man who valued privacy. It was the digital footprint of a man who had been trained not to leave, one trained systematically, professionally, by people whose job it was to ensure that certain men did not appear in search results, did not exist in the public record, could move through the world without casting the shadow that most people cast without thinking. That afternoon, she asked him directly, "What did you do before the electrical work?" Carter glanced at her. A second of assessment, calibrated and brief. Then, government work. He sat down beside Mia and helped her with a subtraction problem, patient and unhurried, and the conversation was over. But the question was not. Douglas Crane's assistant sent the calendar invitation at 7:30 in the morning, marked urgent, and by 9 o'clock, Crane was in his Chicago office, with 4 men and a private investigator he paid well enough to ensure silence. He had learned about the marriage 3 days after it was registered, and had spent those 3 days deciding how to use it. She married an electrician, he said, a handyman in a Montana town with no traffic light. This is not a real marriage. This is a maneuver. He tapped the table. I want grounds. If the marriage doesn't meet the spirit of the clause, we take it to the board. If there is anything on this man, anything at all, we use it. The investigator said he would have a preliminary report within 2 weeks. Douglas leaned back and permitted himself something close to satisfaction. He had been patient. He had spent 2 years reshaping the board, calling in favors, positioning himself carefully around Randall Whitfield's legacy, like a man who understood that the most effective moves are the ones that look like something else entirely. He had been waiting for Sloane to make a mistake. A desperate marriage to a stranger she had known for 3 weeks, conducted in a county clerk's office in rural Montana, looked very much like a mistake. He did not yet know that he was wrong. Sloane found out about the board maneuvering through her own attorney 2 hours later. She flew back to Chicago the following morning. Before she left, she stood in the kitchen doorway, while Carter poured coffee and told him in more detail than was probably necessary the school schedule, what Mia liked for dinner, who to call if anything came up. She heard herself listing contingencies and backup plans and the names of Mia's teachers the way she would brief a team before a trip to a market she didn't fully trust. Carter listened to all of it. Then he said, "We'll be fine." 2 words. Sloane looked at him and experienced something she could not immediately categorize. A pull toward those 2 words, toward the unadorned certainty in them that she had not expected and did not know what to do with. He was not reassuring her the way people reassure each other when they want the conversation to end. He was stating something he believed to be true with the same flat confidence he brought to everything, and the flatness of it was the point. She got in the car and drove to the airport. That night, in a hotel room on the 42nd floor of a Chicago high-rise, she called the house on a video call. Mia answered, holding the phone at an angle that showed mostly the ceiling, talking fast about something that had happened at school. Then, she turned the camera and said, "Wait, I made something. Hold on." She came back with a piece of paper and held it up, a drawing in crayon, a house, 4 figures in front of it, the sun disproportionately large in the corner. The figures were labeled in a 7-year-old's handwriting. One of them was labeled with Sloane's name. Sloane sat in the hotel room and looked at it. She had closed $50 million deals and not felt what she felt looking at that crayon drawing on a hotel screen in an empty room. She said, "That's really good, Mia." It was the truest thing she had said all day. Sloane came back to Millhaven on a Thursday, and Mia came home from school on Friday with red eyes and a tightness in her jaw she was trying very hard to manage. "Some kids at recess," she said. It wasn't a big deal, but her voice did the thing children's voices do when they have decided something is not a big deal, as an act of will rather than as a fact. Carter set down what he was doing and crouched to Mia's level, not kneeling with false casualness, but actually down at her height, elbows on his knees, looking at her straight. He said, "Tell me what happened." Mia told him. It took a few minutes. A group of older kids had told her the house on Birchwood Lane was weird because there was a lady living there who wasn't her mom and didn't look like she belonged. Mia had told them to mind their own business. One of them had laughed. She had not cried in front of them, which she considered her single accomplishment of the afternoon. Carter listened without interrupting, without minimizing, without the reflexive adult impulse to fix the story before it was finished. When Mia was done, he asked her one question about what she had done in response. When she told him, he said, "That was the right call," not enthusiastically, as a statement of fact, delivered with the full weight of his attention, which turned out to be worth more than enthusiasm. Then he said, "You know what Sloane is, right?" Mia shook her head. "She is someone staying with us for a while. People are going to have questions about that, and some of those questions will feel unfair. You don't have to explain anything to anyone. You just tell me when it happens." Mia considered this with appropriate gravity, then went to wash her hands for dinner. Sloane watched from the hallway. She did not move. The moment had a shape she did not want to disrupt. She was also aware that she had just heard Carter Briggs describe her to his daughter, and that the description, "someone staying with us for a while," was both perfectly accurate and somehow not the whole truth of the thing anymore. That evening, she put her laptop in the bedroom and sat down to dinner without it for the first time. Carter had cooked chicken and roasted root vegetables, food made with attention and without performance. He had moved a small bunch of Mia's dried flowers from the windowsill to the table without comment or ceremony. They talked about the town, about the hardware store that had been there since the 1980s, apparently run by a man who knew every customer by name, about the way the morning light came over the mountains in a way unlike any light Sloane had seen anywhere else. Carter said the light was because of the elevation and the valley's angle and the specific position of the October sun, and then said he did not know if any of that was actually true or if he had made it up, and Sloane laughed. It was the first time she had laughed at anything since arriving in Millhaven. It surprised them both slightly. At the end of dinner, Mia looked at Sloane and said, "Did you know my dad saved someone's life once?" Sloane looked at Carter. He shook his head at Mia, gentle but clear. "Not yet." Mia accepted this without complaint and went to clear her plate. The table went quiet. Sloane sat with the information she had not been given, with the shape of something large she could not yet see entirely, and found she was not impatient to see it. She just wanted to stay at this table a little longer. She was not a woman who had ever wanted to linger. Douglas Crane's investigator delivered the report on a Tuesday. Douglas was on the phone when it arrived and kept the other person waiting, something he almost never did, while he read the first page, then the second. Then he put the phone down without explanation and finished the rest. Carter Briggs. 8 years, United States Army, Special Forces designation. Assigned to a unit whose activities were summarized in one line. Classified. 3 combat deployments. A Silver Star citation, the language redacted to 7 words that still managed to convey something about what had been done and under what conditions. A Purple Heart from a second deployment, circumstances also redacted. Separated from service in 2019. Reason given, medical. The nature of the medical issue was sealed, though the notation behavioral health appeared in the final section, the way such things appear in official documents without context, without apology, without any of the weight that the person carrying it actually carries. The rest of the file was a series of redacted lines, black bars where details had been, the kind of redaction that is not clerical, that is structural, deliberate, maintained by people whose job is to ensure that certain information does not travel. Douglas looked at the report for a long time. Then he set it face down on his desk and did not pick it up again that day. He was not a man who frightened easily. He had spent 3 decades in rooms with difficult people and had never once considered walking away from a deal because of what the other side might do. But he was smart enough to recognize the difference between an adversary he had underestimated and one he had not understood at all. He called the investigator back and told him to stop. Then he sat alone for a long time and thought about the next move, which, for the first time in this entire situation, was not immediately obvious. In Millhaven, Sloane was making coffee when she noticed the photograph. She had walked past the shelf above the fireplace every day for 3.5 weeks and registered its presence without truly seeing it. The frame faced backward, which was the same as it not being there. But that morning she stopped. She reached up and turned it around. Carter was younger in the photograph by at least 10 years. He stood in a group of men in full tactical gear against a background of dust and flat desert light. He was smiling, a real smile, the kind she had not yet seen on his face. But the eyes were already different. His eyes in the photograph already held something that did not belong to a man his age, something put there by experience rather than time. She flipped the photograph over. On the back, handwriting small and unhurried. Fallujah, 2011. Everyone came home. She was still holding it when Carter came downstairs. She put it on the kitchen table between them without a word. He looked at it for a long time, long enough that the refrigerator cycled, the floor settled, and somewhere outside a car passed on the street. Then he said, "I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to look at me differently." Sloane said, "Differently? How?" He said, "I don't know yet." It was the first time she had ever heard him admit to not knowing something. The first time she had seen any uncertainty in him at all, not weakness, nothing like weakness, but the specific vulnerability of a person who has been very controlled for a very long time and has just let one thing through. She looked at him across the kitchen table and said, "I think I've been looking at you wrong from the beginning." He looked up. His expression did not change, but something in the quality of his attention shifted, the way a room shifts when someone opens a window. Douglas Crane made his next move on a Wednesday evening. 2 men arrived in Millhaven in a rented car. They were not violent men. Douglas was meticulous about legal exposure, but they were large and carried themselves in a way that communicated intent without requiring language. They had the name of Sloane's Hotel, but Sloane was not at the hotel. She had taken to walking to the library in the evenings, a habit she had developed without noticing, the way people in small towns develop habits by doing a thing twice and then finding themselves doing it again. The parking lot beside the library was where they found her, coming back to her car alone after 9 o'clock. They said they represented a group of interested parties. They said the current marital arrangement was going to become complicated for everyone involved. They said there was a simpler path, and they had paperwork in the car if she wanted to look at it. Their tone was patient and calibrated the tone of men who expected to be listened to because they always had been. In every parking lot, in every conversation that looked like a conversation but was something else. Carter came around the corner of the building. He was not running. He was not hurrying. He walked to the space between Sloane and the two men at a completely unhurried pace and stopped there. He did not say anything. He simply looked at them. There are men who project threat as a performance louder, bigger, stepping forward, raising the register of a room. Carter did none of those things. He was completely still and completely quiet, and the quality of his attention was such that it changed the character of the air in that parking lot, the way a change in barometric pressure changes a room before a storm, something physical, something that the body registers before the mind catches up. The two men had been in enough difficult situations to know the difference between a man who wanted them to think he was dangerous and a man who did not need them to think anything at all. They looked at each other. They looked at Carter. They got in the car. Sloane stood in the parking lot after the taillights disappeared and looked at Carter, who was watching the road. "You weren't following me," she said. "It was not a question. I drive that road every week," he said. "The library's on it. You didn't know they'd be here." "No," she thought about that. "You're not scared." He looked at her. Of what? She did not have an answer. She had meant it as an observation about what she had just witnessed. But standing in the empty parking lot with the mountains dark above the tree line, she understood that what she had seen was not bravery. It was something older and more specific. Something built, at considerable cost, over a long time, and now simply present, the way a load-bearing wall is simply present. It does not announce itself. It just holds. She called her attorney from the car and did not tell Carter why. Sloane flew to Chicago 4 days later with 3 things in her bag: her phone, a manila folder, and a USB drive. No lawyer. She walked into the Whitfield Capital boardroom at 10 in the morning and asked Douglas Crane to have everyone else leave. He did it, and the fact that he did told her something useful about the current state of his confidence. When the room was empty, she laid the contents of the folder on the table. The parking lot camera from the Millhaven library system had recorded the entire encounter clearly enough. Beside the printed stills, she placed a signed statement from Travis Holt, Deputy Sheriff of Millhaven County, former Army Ranger, who had been parked 1 block away that Wednesday night and had recorded the entire exchange on his personal device. Sloane had not known Travis would be there. Carter had not told her he had called him. He had simply called him the same night it happened, said one sentence, and Travis had understood without further explanation. Travis had driven out the next morning, collected his statement, and handed it to Sloane's attorney without being asked twice. Douglas looked at what was on the table. He looked at it for a long time. His expression did not collapse. He was too experienced for that, too practiced at keeping his face a neutral instrument. But something beneath it settled, the way a building settles when something fundamental shifts in the structure below. The calculation he had been running for months had just returned a different answer, and he was doing the arithmetic in real time. He said, "This doesn't need to go further." Sloane said, "I know." The board vote 3 days later was not close. Whitfield Capital remained hers, in full, by every legal measure. It was the outcome she had planned for since sitting across from her father's attorney and hearing the clause read aloud. She had executed it precisely. She had protected what her father built. She had done everything right. She looked at her phone on the plane back to Millhaven. The contract, the original document Carter had signed in that small office 6 months ago, was due to expire in less than 3 weeks. She put the phone face down on the tray table and looked out the window at the dark below, and for the first time in months, she asked herself a question that had nothing to do with voting shares or board composition or legal standing. She asked herself what she actually wanted, not what was strategic, not what was defensible, not what her father's clause required or what the next quarterly report needed. What she wanted, if she allowed herself to want things the way that people who are not always in a negotiation allow themselves to want things. She did not have the answer yet, but she had the question, and that was further than she had been in a long time. The contract's final night was cold in the way only Montana October can be cold, not threatening, just absolute, the temperature dropping without negotiation the moment the sun was gone. Sloane had been asleep for perhaps 2 hours when she heard a sound from the porch. Not a loud sound. Just a chair. Moved. She lay still for a moment. Then she got up. Carter was on the porch in a work jacket over a t-shirt, sitting in one of the 2 wooden chairs, looking at the field behind the house. The sky was clear and full of stars in the way the sky is clear when you are far enough from everything that competes with it. He was not agitated, not pacing. He was simply outside, in the cold, awake, at an hour when most people were not. Sloane went inside and came back with 2 mugs of coffee. She sat in the other chair. She did not ask him anything. She did not offer him a way in or a way out of whatever this was. She just sat and let the quiet be quiet. They sat for a while. The field was silver with frost. Something moved in the tree line a long way off a deer, or the shadow of one. Carter watched it without speaking. The cold settled around them both. The kind of cold that is not unpleasant if you are properly dressed and have something warm in your hands and somewhere to be that is not urgent. Then, at some point, he said, "I lost someone in 2013, one of my guys. I made the call to move, and it was the right call by every measure, and he was still the one who didn't come back." He stopped. He looked at the field. "I carried everyone home who I could. It wasn't always enough." Sloane did not say she was sorry. She did not say it was not his fault. She recognized that he was not saying it to be comforted, was not looking for reassurance or absolution or any of the things people usually want when they speak about their losses. He was saying it because it was true, and because it had lived in him a long time without being said aloud to anyone in this way, and because something about sitting on this porch in this particular cold with this particular person had made it possible to say without it becoming something it was not. She set her mug down. She said, "My father built everything we have, and the way he built it, the claws, the conditions I spent 34 years not knowing if any of it was for me or for the company, whether he saw me as his daughter or as the next person to run the fund." She paused long enough to be sure she was saying the exact thing she meant. "I have never in my life been chosen just because someone wanted to choose me." Carter turned his head and looked at her for the first time since she had come outside. "I want something," he said. She looked at him. "What?" "More time." He said it simply. Not urgently, not hopefully, not with any performance of romantic speech. He said it the way he said most things as a fact, stated cleanly, offered without conditions or expectations. Take it or leave it, this is what is true. Sloane sat with the cold air and the frost silver field and the fact of what he had said. She did not look away. "More time," she repeated. "Yes." She picked up her coffee. She looked at the field. She said, "Okay." It was the smallest word for the largest thing she had decided in years. The Whitfield Capital Regional Office in Millhaven, Montana, opened 12 months after that conversation on the porch. It occupied the second floor of a building on Main Street, with windows that looked west toward the mountains. Sloane's name was on the door as regional director. The Chicago board was nervous about it until the first quarter numbers came in, and after that they mostly stopped calling. One of them rang once to say he thought the Montana office was a vanity project. Sloane told him she would add his concern to her files and thanked him for his time. She did not call him back. She did not leave. She had a Montana driver's license now. She attended the Town Hall Water Board meeting and found it unexpectedly interesting not because of the water itself, but because of the way people in a small town spoke to each other about shared problems without the layered performance of every meeting she had sat in for 15 years. She went back the following month. She had opinions about the proposed drainage rerouting on the west side of town, mentioned them to Carter, who said she should just say them at the meeting, and she had, and the proposal had been modified. She found this quietly remarkable. She had learned the name of the man who ran the hardware store. His name was Gerald, and he had been running the store since he was 26, and he remembered her name by the third time she came in and called her by it without looking it up. Each time, she found this remarkable. Mia came home every day and dropped her backpack in the same spot in the hallway, which drove Sloane mildly insane, and which she had stopped mentioning because it clearly was not going to change and perhaps was not worth changing. On the days Sloane came home before dinner, Mia ran to the door. Not because she had been told to, just because she did. She had started asking Sloane questions about her work, how money moved, what a fund actually did, why some companies failed and others did not. Sloane answered her seriously. It seemed like the least she could do. Mia called her Sloane. Not Mom, not anything that asked permission to mean something, just her name. Said easily, the way you say the name of someone who belongs to your life in a way that does not need a category. Carter was in the kitchen the evening it happened, when Mia ran to the door and Sloane came in, carrying groceries and her work bag, her hair coming loose from the wind. He stood at the stove in an apron with flour on it from the weekend, unwashed. He watched his daughter take the grocery bag without being asked and carry it to the counter with great seriousness. He watched Sloane look at Mia the way people look at things that have surprised them by becoming essential. He turned back to the stove. He was quiet for a moment. Then he was not. Later that evening, after Mia was in bed, Sloane took the photograph from the hall shelf where she had moved it weeks before. She carried it to the bookcase in the living room, the one with the military history books, ordered by Era. She set it on the top shelf, face out. Carter was in the armchair across the room. He looked at it. She looked at him looking at it. The frame faced outward now. Fallujah, 2011. The young man in tactical gear with his team, and his real smile and his two old eyes. He was visible now, in the room, in the light. He was not hidden. Carter did not say anything. Sloane did not say anything. The fire in the wood stove made a small sound. Outside, the Montana night was dark and clear and still. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.